in carbohydrates, dimers are known as disaccharides. Disaccharides consist of two monomer units, two monosaccharides put together. Now they're held together by a special kind of covalent bond, which we call a glycosidic linkage. Whenever you see the term glyco, I want you to think carb. Glyco refers to carb. There are three disaccharides you should know about. First, we have lactose, or milk sugar. It consists of a glucose monomer put together with a galactose monomer. This is the sugar that some people cannot tolerate, cannot break down or digest. We'll talk more about that later. Another disaccharide is maltose. Maltose is known as malt sugar. You find it in malt balls, things that have malt in them. It consists of glucose and another glucose put together. Finally, we have good old table sugar, like you might put on your Cheerios or in your tea. It consists of a glucose put together with a fructose. Here we have two chemical reactions showing monosaccharides being built into disaccharides. Examine these reactions closely. What kind of reactions are these? Think back to a slide found earlier in this presentation. What evidence do you have to back this up? Write that down, bring it to class, and we'll discuss it. This your turn is going to require that you put all this information together. So let's say that we had two glucose molecules with this chemical formula. And we want to take these two glucose molecules and build them into a single maltose dimer. What would the molecular formula be for that maltose, considering the type of reaction that is used to build it? See what you can figure out and bring it to class with you. Finally, we have the polysaccharides, the big old complex carbs. These guys are the giants of the carbohydrate world. Look at this polysaccharide right here. Each of these little rings on here is a monosaccharide, and you can see how many of them have been put together into this big branching structure. Polysaccharides are used for energy storage, sort of long-term energy, and also to build certain structures inside cells. The first polysaccharide we'll discuss is known as starch. Its scientific name is amylose. Now, starch is a plant product, so our bodies don't make it, but we do take in a lot of starch through our diets, through things like potatoes and corn. Wheat products have a lot of starch. Now let's think about that. You find starch in either seeds or in the roots. Both of these areas represent energy storage. So around the seed, that energy is intended to help that little embryonic plant get its start. Inside roots, it's there to help the plant survive the winter. And we steal it from them when we eat it and use it for our own purposes. The point here is that starch is all about energy storage. It's actually made out of a bunch of glucose molecules, and it's specifically made out of it's a terrible alpha glucose molecules. If you put a bunch of these guys together, it forms this long chain, and it does tend to kind of coil like an old-timey telephone cord. So how do plants actually make this starch? Well, remember that plants are photosynthesizers, so they use energy from the sun, and they will capture that energy inside individual glucose molecules. They then stick those glucose molecules together into starch. So it's a long-term energy storage molecule for that plant. When they want to use some of that energy, they can simply break off individual glucose molecules, digest those, and get the energy back out. Now, we animals eat plant products such as potatoes, and we steal that starch, we steal that glucose from the plant. So how do we access it and how do we store it? Well, what we'll do is we'll break down those individual glucose molecules and we use those for energy. If we have excess, though, that will flow through the blood, that will be taken in by the liver, and then it gets linked together into this long branching molecule called glycogen. This will be stored inside the liver and inside the muscles. And we can use these individual glucose molecules later if we need them. We can break them off and metabolize them. So glycogen is analogous to starch. It's just that you find it in animal systems, not in plant systems. The last two polysaccharides we discussed were all about energy storage, but this one is not. Cellulose is all about building structures. It is by far the most common polysaccharide found on the planet, and in fact is the most abundant organic molecule found on the planet. Cellulose is used by plant cells to make the cell wall. That's the stiff structure that surrounds the cell and protects it and gives it shape. Now think about all the places you can find cellulose. The wood of a wooden table is mainly cellulose. The paper that you write on, mainly cellulose. The cotton of a cotton shirt is mainly cellulose. So we find cellulose all over the place. We also find it in high amounts in our diet. When we eat plants, we take it in, but we can't break it down. So to us, we know cellulose as fiber. Now, fiber does have a function in our diets. We can't get any energy out of it, but it sort of helps food and waste products pass through your system. You may have heard that it makes you more regular. It helps you pass waste a little bit more easily, and that's important. But we can't really break it down for energy. There are certain animals and certain bacteria that can break it down and get energy out of it. You might think about a cow, for instance. Cows eat grass all day long. They are able to get energy out of it. So how do they do that? Well, they have special bacteria inside their guts that helps them break down the cellulose. We don't have those bacteria, so we can't break it down. Starch, glycogen, and cellulose are all made out of glucose monomers. So what makes cellulose so different? Why is it so tough, and why can't we digest it? Well, the secret is really in the type of glucose that's used. Starch and glycogen use the alpha form of glucose, whereas cellulose uses the beta form. Here's what the beta form allows cellulose to do. You can see that it can use glycosidic linkages to hook together a bunch of glucose into these long chains. Because some of the hydroxyl groups stick up and down, this allows them to cross-link with each other. They hydrogen bond together, and so these chains get linked into one giant sheet. Now that sheet can resist force from many different directions, so you get sheets instead of long strings. Now we don't have the enzymes necessary to break those little cross linkages. So even though we can eat cellulose, we can't break it down and we can't access that glucose. But certain kinds of bacteria can. Another polysaccharide that uses beta glucose is this stuff called chitin, and it is chitin, not chitin. Chitin, like cellulose, is structurally very tough, but it can break down over time. The most common place that you find chitin is in the exoskeleton of insects. So if you've ever found one of those cicada shells, or back home we called it a locust shell, hanging on a tree, that's made of chitin. Chitin has also been used to make surgical sutures, so material to stitch people back together with. And this is useful because it will break down slowly over time, but is strong in the meantime.